So right now, if you're a wealthy individual and you wanted to give money to your grandchildren, you have a number of choices. You can either buy bars of gold, or you can buy ranches. You could buy blocks of Manhattan or buildings. You can buy shares of companies, corporate stocks. You could put money in a savings account and maybe buy sovereign debt or bonds, corporate bonds or other bonds. And when you add up all this stuff, it's like $500 trillion worth of stuff that people use. And the challenge with all these things is how do I know if I had $1 million today that it would still be worth $1 million 100 years from now?
$1 million in buying power, if you would, yes?
Yeah, money is economic energy.
Yes.
And so I want to have a certain share of economic energy in the civilization, and I want to maintain it for a long time, for generations. So if I buy a city block in Manhattan, it's kind of intuitive that over 200 years, the value of that city block will go up. And if more people move in Manhattan, it'll go up. And so the positives are people move in the city, and I got a share of the economic activity of the city. The negatives are it's going to get taxed by the mayor of Manhattan. There's going to be zoning regulation by the neighborhood zoning board. It's going to get potentially taxed by the state of New York. It might be the politician decides they really want to build Central Park on my block of land, and they just take it from me. And they pay me, sub-market, or maybe they want to turn my land into an airport or into a port. So you own property, it sounds really good, but you have to fight to maintain that property over 100 years, and your children's children will have to fight to maintain it. So if I took $1 million of economic value in 100 years ago, and I held it in dollars, the U.S. dollar is expanding about 7% a year for the past 100 years. So If you do the math, you find that you lose 99% of the economic value in cash. And that's why nobody in their right mind would put $1 million of cash in a box and put a time lock on it, and in the year 2120 expect their great-grandchildren to open the box and for it to be worth anything. It will be worth nothing.
Sure.
If I put $1 million of gold in a box, 100 years from now, the challenge is, will the bank or the government seize the gold? Pretty much every country on earth stole everybody's gold over the last 100 years. If you had it in Germany, it got stolen multiple times. The British, the French, the Japanese, the Russians, even the Americans stole everybody's gold. So, and if it didn't get stolen, that's what we call counterparty risk, seizure, confiscation. If it didn't get stolen, if you increase the gold supply by 2% a year, then you realize the half-life of money in gold, that seems the half-life of energy in a battery. The half-life of money in gold is 35 years.
Which, by the way, we increase it by 2% because we're mining new gold every year, right? It isn't a limited fixed amount.
You can't stop the gold miners from mining gold. So ultimately, the economic energy stored in the container of gold is dissipating at 2 to 3% a year, which means you're going to cut it in half once, twice, 3 times. Right? So you're going to be down to 12.5% of what you had, even if it doesn't get seized. So when you think about these things, you realize that gold doesn't really hold economic energy great. It just happens to be the best portable, non-sovereign way to move energy around.
And portable is I'm not going to pick up a ton of gold and move it someplace.
Yeah, it's semi-portable. You couldn't move $1 million of gold through an airport, but it's more portable than a building, right? You're not moving your building out of LA ever, right? So you've got this conundrum, which is things that hold their value for a long time, like soccer teams or football teams, maybe. Well, they have cultural risk. Will people still want to watch football and soccer in 100 years? And they're not so portable, and they're very political. Then you have things that look straightforward, like owning 1,000 acres of land. But if your enemy takes over as governor of the state, they just pass a property tax, and they tax your land away from you. And then the oldest cliche is lost the family farm because we couldn't pay the property taxes.
Sure. And by the way, that's an important point, right? Because the value of your land that you own dissipates over time because it's taxed constantly. And it's like, you could, if you had a deed to a piece of land for 100 years, at the end, you don't own the land anymore if you didn't pay your taxes.
Yeah, so if you're a rich family in New York City and you have real estate, the reason that you still own it is because you rented it out and you were very competent in the way you manage the politics, the tax, and the rent, and you manage to get more rent than the tax. And then if you do that well, and if you get lucky, then you'll still have the land. But the families that keep their land for hundreds of years and use it to store wealth, and they never have it taxed away or taken away. You know who they are?
The dictators, the rulers, the kings.
The sovereigns.
Yes.
Okay, if you own the country, like let's say the Windsors. The Windsors, still own the middle of central London, but that's because they kind of own the government, or at least they're politically favored. Or if you go to the Middle East, you go to Dubai, you're a wealthy foreigner. You're like, I think I'll just buy a bunch of beachfront here. No, you're not. They don't sell the good property to foreigners. You have to be a royal in order to own the beach. So many countries, what you find is the sovereigns, they own the land forever in perpetuity and give it to their children's children's children. And the reason they can afford to do it is because there's no tax, because they make the tax laws.
Threefold over the course of 100 years, land and buildings are being taxed and evaporated, if you would, by taxation. So if people start realizing Bitcoin as a strong store of value that isn't dissipating, isn't being taxed, what is you walk through some of the numbers. If it takes a percentage of the store of value of land or gold and so forth, what could be the price of Bitcoin in the future? Not making any guarantees, but
when you think of it as digital gold, then it should replace gold. Gold's worth $10 trillion, and that takes Bitcoin to 500,000. But when you think of it as digital property, like replacing buildings and land and other long storeholds of wealth, then you're up by a factor of 20 or 30 from there. I mean, it should not be. It's much better than digital gold because I can move Bitcoin at the speed of light and I can program it to 1 million transactions an hour on an iPhone or a website. You can't do that with gold. So it's got more utility than gold, which means it's probably worth 20 or 30 trillion if it just replaces the gold. But instead of buying the Fontainebleau Hotel, which is a nice hotel, worth whatever billions in Miami Beach, instead of buying the equivalent amount of Bitcoin, if you bought the Bitcoin, you can move that to any city in the world every hour of the day, compose it, decompose it, recompose it, dematerialize it, and when there's a nasty tax on it, you can just move yourself to a different jurisdiction where there's a better tax treatment. And if you think of it like that, then it's a multi-$100 trillion asset class. So at 10 trillion, it's 500,000. At 100 trillion, it's 5 million. So I think, we're marching toward $10 trillion, which is, $10 million a coin, which is why Bitcoin enthusiasts see it's just a very great long-term store of value. And it's a great investment idea because it meets the needs of 8 billion people. The average person, the middle-class person that drives an Uber or works as a dentist, they can't buy $387 worth of a building in New York City every month is their savings plan, right? And a person in Africa can't buy a small share of a nice piece of property. They can't buy $127 worth of a Picasso painting. So Bitcoin offers property rights at any scale, any amount of money, anybody in the world, and you don't have to worry about, will people like Picassos? Will they still want buildings in Vegas or New York? Will some politician tax it away from me? Well, can I take it through an airport? So if you're looking for an egalitarian, utilitarian way for people to save money and protect their life force or protect their economic wealth for the next 100 years, and you are looking for something that's kind of consistent with the mobile wave, Android phones, iPhones, websites, that's truly global, it's more appealing to people in Nigeria and Argentina than it is appealing to people in Manhattan.
I'm gonna get there, right? Because it really is part of creating a world of abundance. It is critically important as a means for that. Michael, I wake up every morning with you and your tweets. I enjoy your tweets. It's definitely good. I love this one from a little bit ago, and it was important and prophetic. You said, "I thought it was late." You said, "I thought I was late to Bitcoin, but apparently not."
Yeah.
And that's one of the important things that I think people need to get. It's not too late to Bitcoin, especially if we have the potential to hit 500,000, 5 million, $10 million of Bitcoin. It's still early in the deceptive phase of its growth.
I thought when Google came public, I was too late. But if you look at the really great successes of our lifetime, Peter, the digital monopolies, the Apple, the Google, the YouTube, the Facebook, these things.
The MicroStrategy.
We thought that we were late to them, but the truth is Google would have been a good idea to invest in, all the way up to like a few months ago. It's still getting more powerful, and you think you've fully embraced Google in the year 2018, but Google was going to get more powerful and surge. And if you thought you understood it in 2020, by 2021 it was more powerful. And the same is true with Apple. And Apple and Google, probably more powerful than most nation states. Same with Microsoft. We thought Microsoft, we understood that one, and Microsoft got more powerful in the past 24 months.
I agree. Who would you rather go to war with as your ally? Google or Greece or Ghana or, it's like you would rather have one of these companies. People think you've been involved in Bitcoin for a decade since, the beginning, because you've become such a strong, both knowledgeable and protagonist on you. But it wasn't. It was just a few years ago. Can you tell the story of what happened that got you excited and gave you, for lack of a better term, religion on this?
Bitcoin represents a paradigm shift. It's the digital transformation of money, property, and energy. And paradigm shifts are so profound that you're staring at them and you don't realize they took place because your worldview is constructed based upon a bunch of assumptions that you've always taken for granted. And so what Thomas Kuhn says in the structure of scientific revolutions and what we study at MIT is there's only two circumstances under which people willingly undergo a paradigm shift. And one way is you wait for the old guard to die. And the millennials they get it because they're different. And Einstein, said God does not play dice with the universe. Einstein never liked quantum theory. You could be a brilliant person, but you won't embrace the paradigm shift while you're alive in the absence of a crisis. The second way you get paradigm shift is a war. When there's a war and there are bombs dropping from above, you don't believe in atomic power, but then someone drops a nuclear weapon and the city evaporates, and all of a sudden you become a believer and you reassess your priorities.